the different types of companies that are either, struggling in China, the winner takes all, the giant versus the dwarf, the giant versus the dwarf in the States, and the state carnival. Do you think this model still kind of is true in China, with the winner takes all, the giant versus the dwarf?
The other one, the second book was about consumers, consumer-facing businesses. And when you talk about the subject, let's say in the United States, Europe, people talk a lot about consumer adoption. They usually talk about two factors: the consumer behavior and the competitive dynamics. So people talk a lot about competitive advantage. Do people like Coke? Is it a fad? In China, you really have a third factor, and it's the one that gives everyone trouble, which is the role of the state.
Governments, right.
You talk to a CPG analyst or something in California, they're going to talk about, brand power versus shelf space versus whatever. As soon as you take that, let's say, Clorox versus Heinz versus Coke, as soon as you take that question to China, you have the question of the role of the state. And that's the one that most analysts have trouble with, because it's just fuzzy to them. They don't have a way to take that apart. And we laid out some specific questions you can ask to get your brain around the role of the state and what it means.
Right.
An example would be, people talk about beer in China. Most of the beer companies in China are state-owned. Beijing Yanjing, China Resources. But the state doesn't actually have an interest in beer. So just because they're state-owned doesn't necessarily mean anything. And then in other areas like social media, the state is incredibly involved, but there are no state-owned companies.
Right.
That's Tencent, that's Baidu.
Right.
So you have to sort of ask the right questions to figure out what you're dealing with. And that's what we laid out in that book, was how to sort of tease apart the role of the state in various situations.
Right.
And I thought it was really great, but most people like the first book, but I like the second.